Hello BookTube, this is Weekly Reads. I started my reading week not exactly knowing what I wanted to read for the last days of May, but as the week progressed, I decided what I wanted to read, and also what I wanted to read for the first days of June. So I started this past reading week with two short story collections. Further News of Defeat by Michael X. Wang, and Glossary for the End of Days by Ian Stansel. I started with Further News of Defeat. So this is a short story collection that is set in China, mostly during the mid to late 20th century, although there's at least one story that is set during World War II. And they're all set in roughly the same region of China. A number of cities and villages, sorry about that, kind of reappear throughout many of these stories. I read the first, or most of the first story, Minor Revolution, which is set during the Tiananmen Square protests. It's about an illiterate peasant woman who is married to a professor who is leading his students into the Tiananmen Square protests. He is eventually arrested, and his wife and a student of his sort of work to see him in jail. And then later, once the crackdown happens, flee to her home village. And the story really didn't do anything for me. And that was true for the other stories. I dipped into them and they just didn't do anything for me, unfortunately. And the same is true of Glossary for the End of Days. So the first story was John is Alive, which is about an alternate world in which John Lennon survived his assassination or his murder, and eventually the Beatles reformed and released an album that the main characters of the short story are waiting in line to get, and then the story progresses from there in a way that I don't think necessarily works. And that was true of a lot of the stories that the parts of the stories that I read, because this didn't really do anything for me, although I would say this collection didn't work as well as Further News of Defeat. But anyway, again, as I've mentioned numerous times, I really don't get on with whatever genre you want to call this. Literary fiction, general fiction, market fiction, pretentious fiction, whatever, realistic fiction. But I keep coming back to it for reasons. And in this particular case, I wanted to, at the time I picked these two up, I had a bit of an obsession with fiction either published or distributed by university presses, while Further News of Defeat is published by Autumn House. They have a distribution deal with University of Chicago, and Glossary for the End of Days is put out by Acre, which is, I guess, somehow part of the University of Cincinnati, which has a distribution deal with the University of Chicago Press. But anyway, so I'm glad I finally had a look at them. Disappointed they didn't really do anything for me, and I'll probably send them on their way at some point in the future when I do my next unhaul. So on Sunday, I reread for the 5th or 6th time by this point, I think, The Master of Go by Yasunari Kawabata, which is why the novel made a few appearances this past week. So again, The Master of Go is a largely fictionalized account of the retirement match of Honinbo Shusai, a master of Go, and his opponent for this match was Minoru Katani, who is a young up-and-coming player of Go. Kawabata was a reporter at the time, and he covered the match for one of the sponsoring newspapers. And the novel is both a reportage of the match and also studies of the individual combatants. And the novel then goes into sort of through these two looks at art and mechanization of how Go went from sort of an art to a more codified sort of competition. It's a blast. I'm probably selling it short, but I love this novel. It is my favorite by Kawabata, and I've read it periodically, and this is one of those works that I read and reread, and my appreciation increases every time I read it, which, if you watched my 10 novels that I have reread, some of which I still like, yeah, most of them I don't. So anyway, and I managed to actually finish Master of Go with enough time to read something else. So I reread Bridled by Amy Meng. This is a short story collection that I've had for a few years now, and this is my third reading. And I guess I'm not too impressed. My second reading was a bit more positive than my first, and this reading, I think that was the final reading. To collect the poems, there are some good ones, but for the most part, I'm not that impressed. And then on Monday, I had a bit of a conundrum because I had 3 days left in May, and I wasn't entirely sure what I should read. And then it hit me, and then I'm like, I just got in 3 poetry collections, so I'll read them the last 3 days of May before moving on to something else. So I started with The Man with Night Sweats by Thom Gunn. This is a collection released late in his life. It's mixed. There are some poems that I really liked. Most of them I didn't particularly care for, but the poem Lament is absolutely amazing. It is a brilliant meditation on loss and AIDS, and it is great. On Tuesday, I read The Anchorage by Mark Wunderlich. This is his debut collection. I have all of his work. This collection is definitely a first collection. It's very much a poet still trying to find his voice and also trying to not overwrite. A lot of the poems are rather clunky, and I think probably could have been more slimmed down. But there are some really good poems that I think point to Wunderlich's sort of growth as a poet and him finding his voice. And finally, I bailed on, or set aside, I will come back to this at some point, Head Off and Split by Nikky Finney. This is a poetry collection that is, the poems I read were largely political, looking at the African American experience in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, namely Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Rita, and they didn't do anything for me. it read more like essays than poetry, which I know Steve Donahue would point out that, well, except for the fact that poetry is pretty much contemporary poetry is in weird formations anyway. They're practically prose, but it just... So I'm going to set it aside, and this collection aside, and I'll come back to it maybe sometime next year. So that brings me to June. So for the first 2 days of June, I decided to read The Seven Deadly Sins by Nakaba Suzuki, volumes 19 through 23. So, The Seven Deadly Sins is a manga series set in a world inspired by the Arthurian mythos. So, the land is called Britannia, and there are a number of kingdoms. The one that gets the most focus is Leonis, although there is Camelot and there is a King Arthur. So, the series begins with Princess Elizabeth of the Kingdom of Leonis. Her father, King Baltra, has been overthrown by the Holy Knights, an order of superhuman knighthood, or superhuman knights. The Holy Knights have become increasingly tyrannical in their rule, and in order to stop them, Elizabeth has gone to search for the Seven Deadly Sins, another order of knighthood who 10 years previously were accused of assassinating the then head of the Holy Knights and trying to overthrow the kingdom. Elizabeth finds the former leader of the Seven Deadly Sins, Melodius, and together they go in search of the other 6 to restore her father to his throne, which they eventually do. Once 6 of the 7. The 7th is still missing. From there, the series sort of further develops into a conflict between the extant races of Britannia and a restored demon race, which was the goal of the 2 chief holy knights. So, before we talk about these volumes, I do want to touch on the Seven Deadly Sins, since in these volumes, all 7 are finally revealed. So, the first of the 7 we meet is Melodius, the Dragon Son of Wrath. He looks to be a child, but he's incredibly powerful, and he has an ability to counter his enemies' moves and basically reflect the damage back on them. The next is Deanne, who is the most prominent cover model for this volume. She is a giantess with immense strength and a propensity to lose her memories. The next is Ban, who... and this is Melodia. Oh, wait, no. Melodius is the cover model on this volume, the most prominent one. Anyway, so the next one met is Ban, who is this guy here. He is an immortal thief who can use a magic technique to steal things. The fourth met is King, who is this little kid here. He is a fairy king who has a number of magical abilities. The fifth that is encountered is Gauther, who is this pink-haired individual here. He has telepathic abilities. He can rewrite memories, and he can also use light as a weapon. The sixth one is Merlin, who I don't think she appears on any of the, yeah, she doesn't appear in any of these volumes or on the cover. She is basically a gender bent version of the Merlin from the Arthurian mythos. She's an immensely powerful sorceress who is the sin of gluttony. I forgot to mention who their sins were. So Diane is envy. Ban is obviously greed. King is sloth. Gauther is lust. Merlin is gluttony. And the final member of the seven is Escanor. This guy here, who is the sin of pride, and who is absolutely amazing. See if I can find him in his more so that is Escanor in all his glory. So basically, Escanor is like the Hulk, except for whereas the Hulk gains super strength when he is angry, when Bruce Banner is angry. Escanor's power waxes and wanes with the solar cycle. So at noon, his power is at their peak, and he is the strongest of the seven deadly sins. But at night, he is basically incredibly weak. And he is freaking amazing. It was just absolutely his appearance, his skills are just amazing. Oh, here's some more. So the plot of these volumes features the invasion of the Ten Commandments. They are 10 incredibly powerful demons who are seeking to conquer Britannia in order to free the rest of the demon race from their imprisonment. So previously to this, the seven deadly sins have split up. Ban has left to go search for a way to restore his lover Elaine to life, accompanied by a former holy knight named Jericho, who comes to have a crush on Ban because he saved her during the basically a number of younger holy knights were basically turned into human demon hybrids, and he managed to save her from that. Deanne has left as well because her memories were wiped by Gauther because she rightly called Gauther out on his method of saving Gwylia, another holy knight, from a similar fate. King has left to basically try to find Deanne, but also check up on Ban because Ban is in love with King's sister. And the rest of the Holy Knight, the rest of the seven deadly sins are trying to combat the Ten Commandments. So gradually in these volumes, the seven eventually come back together at a second Visal fighting festival put on by two of the Ten Commandments, Gloxinia and Dolar. And it is amazing. Oh no, it's in this one. And just how, so basically it features a number of tag team battles, which are hilarious. Elizabeth tags with Elaine, and they managed to defeat 2 random characters. Ben and Melodious have a conversation about which is better, Elaine or Elizabeth, while fighting 2 demons, and it is just a hoot. And then King and Deanne fight the servants of Glossary and Dolar, and that's really interesting, particularly how the 2 fight for each other, even though Deanne has no memories of their relationship, but it's really brilliant as well. And then, oh yeah, this is, and then, Gauther and Jericho fight Escanor in his weakened state and Hawk, the mascot pig. But while on the surface it looks like Gauther is going to, oh, there's Merlin right there. Gauther is going to have a really easy time of it. He doesn't, because he really brings out Escanor, and what precedes is an amazing moment that is just glorious, because in the final sort of bit of a fight, Escanor does something unexpected, which leads to quite an interesting bit in the in volumes 22 and 23, where Melodious gets to have some wonderful fight scenes, although it also takes a dark turn briefly. But yeah, it was just, I had a blast. So as much as some of the volumes I read a few months ago kind of didn't quite work on me, these 5 volumes really worked. I loved them. They were absolutely fantastic. So I'm looking forward to collecting more volumes of the 7 Deadly Sins and reading them, and probably when I have the complete series, which I now have, 1 volume post midway through. So I've got 21 volumes left, because there are 44 volumes. And I'm looking forward to it, and eventually rereading the series as well. So what will I be reading this coming reading week? So the plan for right now is I will start tomorrow with A Book of Tongues by Gemma Files. This is a weird Western that I'm going to be reading for June on the Range, because I really do not have any Western fiction. So this is the best I've got. And I'll talk a bit more about the book next week when I actually know what the plot is. I'm also going to read maybe Sterling Karat Gold by Isabel Waidner, which I'm going to be doing, which I don't know much except for it won the Goldsmith Prize, and it was up for another prize last year. But I don't know much about it, so I'll talk a bit more about that after I've dipped into it. And finally, I'm going to read, or hopefully I'll get to, She-Wolves, The Women Who Ruled England Before Elizabeth by Helen Castor, which I'm reading for Historathon, even though I suspect a good chunk of this book actually might be for the next No? Okay. So first is Matilda, and then Eleanor, and then Isabella, which would be the Queen of Edward II, and then Margaret, who would be Margaret Beaufort. So, yeah. So, yeah, this more fully, except for maybe the last chapter, this does fully fit into this round of Historathon. So, that's cool. So, that's my plan. Although, if I bail or if things change, then, yeah, I'll adjust accordingly. But anyway, BookTube, that's all I got for this week. Next week, I'll try to do videos every day so I can do my 900th video Q&A on Friday afternoon. So that's still the plan. So if you have any questions, there's still time to leave a question in the comments, and I will answer them on Friday. So in a BookTube, that's all I got for this week. So thank you. Have a great afternoon and evening, and I hope you have a great weekend. So until I see you again on Monday, stay safe.